Good evening, everyone. My name's Mark, and on behalf of Book Soup, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for our virtual event with Jonathan Van Ness in conversation with Emily Bossak, discussing Jonathan's new book, Love That Story, Observations from a Gorgeously Queer Life. Thank you all so much for coming out to this tonight. We're very sorry it can't be in person, but we're wishing that Jonathan gets healthy and is in better spirits as soon as possible.
I don't know. All COVID things considered, I'm in pretty good spirits, everyone.
Woo!
Coming straight from the bathtub.
I'm literally in my bathtub. I wanted to make it special for you, Los Angeles.
So for regular updates on Book Soup's upcoming events, feel free to subscribe to our email newsletter. Just so you guys know, this evening's virtual event will end with a Q&A. To submit a question, please use the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. If you see a question on the list you'd like, please click the like button. We'll try to answer as many questions as time will allow, but I'm going to assume there's a lot tonight. Finally, consider supporting our bookstore and the author's work by purchasing a copy of today's featured book, Love That Story. Just click on the green purchase button directly below the viewer screen. Yeah, the link will redirect you to our website where you can continue your checkout process. For those of you that had tickets to the in-person event, you've already purchased a book, and there should be instructions emailed to you about how to get that either at the store or shipped to you. Now, I will do a few words on our featured guests. So, Emily Bossak is a West Coast-based producer and comedian. She's best known for her Liza Minnelli impression and as the co-executive producer of Netflix Getting Curious with Jonathan Van Ness and a former producer of the hit podcast of the same name. Emily is currently appearing as a recurring stand-in for Amy Adams and Jessica Chastain. You can find her in the background of some of your favorite celebrity Instagram posts or being asked by Gal Gadot where she can get her parking validated. Jonathan Van Ness is a hairstylist by trade turned personality, writer, comedian, and entertainer by life. Jonathan is seeking to celebrate authenticity and uniqueness within the beauty and entertainment industry as an HIV plus non-binary truth teller, determined to make this world a better, more equitable, yet funnier place. As a true multi-hyphenate, Jonathan Van Ness is doing the most with their time by performing their sold-out stand-up comedy on tour, being an award-winning television personality, starting a sustainable hair care brand, being the New York Times best-selling author of Over the Top, practicing their gymnastics and figure skating skills, and having a podcast and 2 Netflix shows. There's also the garden, chickens, cats, and dogs, and they take care of their husband, which they take care of with their husband, Mark. Don't let Jonathan near an adoption center because they will leave with another cat or 2. More at JVN and www.jonathanvanness.com. All right, that's enough of me. Without further ado, I'm going to turn the camera over to Jonathan and Emily. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the presentation, everyone.
Thanks, honey.
Oh, Mark,
Emily.
Get it. Should we throw the song back on, Mariah Carey? Hold on.
Yes, we need
See, everyone's in for a treat. I know this was supposed to be live, but look how more intimate it is. I'm in sweatpants, you're in a bathtub.
I literally drew myself a COVID bath and I said, what would Mariah Carey do? And I said, I think she would have had a better dress. I'm in my new Skims crop top, which is not what Mariah was wearing in the pool the other day, but nonetheless, thank you for sharing this gorgeous Thursday night with us. I'm sorry I look so good. I won't apologize for it again. I have these candles. I have my book. I have my best friend, Emily Bossak, right here. Who wrote those intros? Darling, give them a raise.
Oh, that bio was to die. Absolutely to die. Everybody, we're all here for Love That Story. I'm sorry that we can't be in person, but at least we're in sweatpants. have a glass of wine, get in the bathtub yourself, do everything that you want. I mean, if you haven't purchased your copy of Love That Story, you can actually smash the button below. I want selfies. I want hashtags. I want to see everybody with their Love That Story book. Post.
Your highlighted moments, like highlight your favorite passages, like please. Also, if you were meant to be at the in-person event tonight, just to reiterate from earlier, your signed copy is already coming. You've already ordered it. Check your emails. The directions are in there. And echoing Emily, what you said, I'm so sorry we're not all together. I really wanted to be there. That fucking COVID. So I love you. But if you haven't bought your book, honey, support queer authors. Let's do this, honey. Let's do that. So I am giving you my best Mariah Carey. I am in a swimsuit and a crop top, but there's my leg, and we are in the bubble bath. And I never thought I'd be in the bubble bath on this book tour, but nonetheless, here we are. Emily, what's the first question?
First question. Well, tonight we're talking about your new book, Love That Story, Observations from a Gorgeously Queer Life. It's a book of essays ranging in topics from processing grief, cannabis reform, LGBTQIA rights, white privilege, etc. And you've had a pretty insane year and a half of a year. You were on an international comedy tour. You launched a hair care brand. You've had 2 TV shows that you both hosted, one that you executive produced. What my question is how is Love That Story different from all the past projects that you've worked on?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think Love That Story is it's a collection of everything that I've been through in my entire life, but I think there's been a special emphasis in these last few years, because when you become such a public-facing figure, it's hard to have nuanced conversations on Twitter or Instagram. And I have so many observations from a gorgeously queer life. I have so much that I want to share. I have so much that I've learned. And I think it's like, I've had such special experiences being able to interview all the different people that I've interviewed on Getting Curious, the podcast. And I want to share what I've learned. And I think there's so much anger and hurt and frustration. And if I could empower people to find the love in their stories and be more empowered with more joy and more resources for knowledge and how to understand context and how I've kind of done that in my life, then that would be great. And I've always felt like my mission in life was to take my biggest struggles and try to transmute that for not only to heal from my greatest struggles, but to transmute my struggles into allowing other people to find more healing. And hopefully that's something that this book can do for people.
Yeah.
And make them less feel.
Yeah. I mean, and you do that. It was interesting because coming off of the New York Times bestseller Over the Top, your first book, it was interesting how you even said that you reflected on how the press and interviewers foregrounded a lot of the heavy points from Over the Top, and it kind of skimmed over some of the lighter moments. So let's move into a question that's more on the lighter note. You have a chapter that's distinctly about queer history, and the place setting is actually Quincy, where you and I grew up. So I'm turning to page 60. Everyone follow me in your books, because you all should be having it by now. And you discuss and you talk about the unofficial headquarters for queer people in Quincy to meet and hang out was a hotel with a bar in the back. And honestly, and the history of this place, Quincy House, deserves its own book. Then you go on to say it opened in 1938 and it was the Cat's Meow, where everyone who was anyone wanted to be, with a separate entrance for ladies so they couldn't have to pass by the bar. Abraham Lincoln, cough gay, look it up, cough, even came through a few times. That was some hard-hitting reporting. I need to hear about this.
Well, a lot of sources. Well, one thing that's interesting about that time is that it wasn't until around 1900 that we started to see contemporary uses of gay or of like homosexual and gay and started to see those the way that we do now. And so there is a lot of sources that say that Abraham Lincoln engaged in same-sex acts. whether or not that means that he would have, so bi, pan, whatever. There's a lot of sources that say that. I didn't get too much into that. I just gave you the cough version. But I do think that essay is really, it's really special to me because so often we are told queer narratives and LGBTQ plus narratives through this like tragedy based way, like so much darkness, so much negativity, the abuse that we've endured, whether it's HIV or so much of the stuff that I talked about in my first book. But I wanted to tell a story and learn about more just like the lighter side, the love, and see if there was any people that were doing amazing work in Quincy that maybe I didn't even know about, and maybe made the environment more accepting and loving for me growing up there that I didn't even know of. And so I was really lucky to get to interview lots of people and do a lot of research there, and really just a lot of time interviewing folks to learn about the person behind Irene's Cabaret. And it's a really lovely story. And I think it's really healing when you are a member of a marginalized community, especially the queer community, because like we talk about in Getting Curious, the show, so many of the systems that are around were set up to make us be isolated from each other. So when we can learn about queer people that have come before us, especially in a place where you felt so isolated as I felt in Quincy, that's a really cool thing when you realize that there's been people around for hundreds of years like you, where you come from.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you've always called yourself journalist adjacent whenever you do Getting Curious and your curiosities, but you do go full on reporter in this book, whether it's about cannabis or queer history or anything. Like the deep dive into the Quincy queer history, I was like, whoa, I had no idea.
Well, there's so much of this stuff that we just don't learn about in school. And unless you like have time to gather that information or like interview 250 people for your podcast and then like get the impetus to like learn more and research more, you wouldn't get to know that stuff. And but I think that the cool thing is that when we can find the context around like the dates and the chronological timing of, say, marijuana, or in the turf essay, or in the Sorry Karen essay, it is really empowering for us when we realize like where we are in time. And I think when we're better equipped with that information, we can be better allies and we can make better choices, and also like connect with people more where they might be not understanding where we're coming from when we say, you know, that systemic racism is a huge issue, or the HIV safety net is a huge issue that we need to work on and do better for. When people want to dismiss those ideas, I think there's a lot of like really clear information in here that will help you have at least a jumping off point for you to do more research for yourself.
Yeah. One thing I like about this book, just like Over the Top, is you move through some of the talking points of your most vulnerable moments through humor. And the humor doesn't take the air out of the moment, it gives it perspective. There's a chapter where you specifically discuss body image, and there's a quote that you give that says, "There's a larger picture to explore here. What were so many of us exposed to in life that causes us to hate our bodies? Why is it that at such a young age, I came to the conclusion that how my body looked would directly influence my ability to feel happy, connected, and loved?" Oh yeah, it's that fucking Bowflex commercial. Mm-hmm. What was it like playing the duality between vulnerability and humor in this book?
I think the humor has always played this like almost like part that comes in and like rescues me when things are too tough and when things are too hard. That part comes in and does make light of a situation and will come in for like that comedic reprieve, because I think that part is a little fearful that if I ever didn't do that, then like I would be overwhelmed with sadness. Right. And that's not true, but I do feel like in this book I tried to let some of those more direct moments be, and then let my humor come out in louder punches, versus like, I think I trusted the reader to be able to stick with me more in this book. And so I'm excited for people to go on that journey where it is super funny still and it's super punchy, but sometimes I think, especially in over the top comedy, was like it's amazing when you can use like comedy to like make light of something, but it's also cool when you can let it ride and when you can sit with something that's uncomfortable for a little bit.
Yeah. And it's interesting. You have a really good structure here where you can take some of these conversations and topics that can be a little difficult to talk about, and it makes it like the Thanksgiving dinner where now you can actually like talk to people about it if you felt uncomfortable. Also in this chapter, you speak to the difference between body positivity and body neutrality. What's the difference between those two?
Well, I feel like body positivity is this idea of like people who are like confident and love themselves, even though they like aren't a classic ideal of beauty. And I feel like that is really damaging to people who are labeled as body positive, because we're made to seem like brave and confident, which I feel like the subtext of that is like not hot, or like you shouldn't be, you know, so proud to look the way that you look. Like I would never dress how you dress or present myself the way you do if I looked like that. And really, it's those unrealistic beauty ideals and just the beauty ideals as we know them now that need to go in the first place. So I think that body positivity, that term kind of reinforces those, whereas body neutrality says we're celebrating and beautiful and worthy of love and desire and connection and all of those things, despite how our body looks. And we should be able to be appreciated for more than our external shape. And so I think, you know, really body neutrality is about like separating your worth and your value from how we look. And I think that's a really powerful thing for us to think about and try to get into, because it's just so not it.
Yeah, and it's old, you know.
It's make space for it, and it also, I think what it is this bath is hot and I have COVID, but the greater point is that it holds all of us back. And it doesn't hold back just people who fall outside of those rigid expectations. It also holds back the people who are those rigid expectations, because when you only celebrate someone for their shell, for their outside, it doesn't honor their humanity. We are so much more than that. And that essay explores the ways that we're more than that.
Right. I like that. What else is there? I want to highlight how comedy is like the through line for this entire book of essays. And you've been a comedian since I met you when we were 11. You've always been funny. You've always made like the most incredible similes. And then in the book, you do like stand up for thousands of people. And in the book, you talk about imposter syndrome. Can we talk about this feeling? And do you have any advice for anyone who's like suffering from it?
Well, I think that imposter syndrome is such a human and universal experience. I think that if most people are being honest with themselves, we all question our ability to do or complete the opportunities that we've been given in our life. And I think it's just, and really that relates to shame and worthiness. And so I explore what the actual psychological like phenomenon of imposter syndrome is, and some other super incredibly talented people or other incredibly talented people who have imposter syndrome. And I don't want to be a spoiler alert, but the point is that I think it's comforting to know that other people suffer from that too. And that there's a lot of different paths to success, and there's not only one way to get there, and that's okay. And also that I think there's a big piece of like comparison, like comparing ourselves to other people and other people's experiences, that plays a big part in imposter syndrome. And if we can try to pause around the comparisons, I think we can feel better about what we've accomplished.
I like that. Well, now we're going to switch things up and play a little game. We're going to play a little Jeopardy style game really fast, probably going to be the only question. The clue is turf. The answer is, who is J.K. Rowling? Can you explain why it's so important to know what a trans exclusionary radical feminist is and everything kind of involved with this? Because it is a chapter in the book.
Well, yeah. So trans exclusionary radical feminism is a cohort of people who think that by establishing trans people's rights, more specifically trans women's rights and non-binary, but specifically trans people, that they are erasing women's rights. And there's this huge fear that there's an erasure of like women's rights, fairness in sport, safety in bathrooms, etc. And that is an incredibly damaging thing because transphobia is rampant and it is spreading across the country, across the world, actually. And what we explore in this essay is that is actually not new. Transphobia has been around for hundreds of years. People's distrust of transphobia has been around for hundreds of years. And really, the gender binary is something that's been around for like 400 years. And ever since white men were appointed the stewards of families and the only people who could vote and own land, everything's been going awry since then. And if you look, since the gender binary has been established as that we know it, every single group of people who has gained their right to own property or to vote has had to wait in line while someone else was repressed. So at first, it was only white men could own land and vote. Then it was men could own land and vote. But if you were Black, your vote didn't count for as much. Then eventually white women gained the right to vote. And then 30 something years later, then only in 1955 were Black women granted the right to vote. So, and then in the 1800s, it's like who was seen as white has also changed over time, which is the intersection between the ways that white supremacy has marginalized and oppressed people. TERFs are also using a lot of that same marginalizing tactics to villainize trans people. And now that's also happening not only with TERFs specifically, but it's also now happening a lot with legislatures. I'm fully sweating from this bath, everyone. Don't worry, I'm fine. No, I'm fine. But now in a lot of legislatures, we're seeing bills getting passed every week, it seems, that are super transphobic, and they are laden with misinformation around an attack on fairness in women's sports, an attack on women in general, when really the attack on women's sports and the threat to women's sports is rampant sexual abuse, is rampant underfunding of women's sports when they're compared to their male peers. It's lack of opportunity, it's lack of advertisement, it's lack of investment. And also, sports inherently are not fair. You can't talk about the fairness of sports if you don't talk about class, race, money. If you have, a two-parent household, that's going to make your life way more applicable to competitive sports if you have one parent that can take you to all of your practices. And if your family makes enough money for you to get a coach. If you're 7 feet tall, you're probably going to be a really good basketball player or volleyball player. That's a biological advantage, but it's celebrated, in cisgender people. Whereas in trans people, it's seen as this, thing where you're trying to cheat or lie to people. And really, gender is just a part of who you are. Right. And we have to take the animosity out of that and the villainization out of that. And that essay about TERFs explores that, and it also just explores what it is to be disappointed in someone and also hold out hope that that person can heal and can make amends for the hurt that they've caused.
Yeah. I mean, you can smell that it comes from our own insecurity and our own femininity. It's very strange. Okay, everybody, make sure that you drop your questions in the chat, and be sure to purchase Love That Story at the button below.
Yes,
I'm going to wrap up some of my questions, so I'll give you some just easy general ones. Okay. What was your favorite chapter to write?
Favorite chapter to write? Love Letter to Hairdressing was really fun. Getting to just talk about hair and all the things that I learned behind the chair and how to get the best relationship with your hairstylist and how to get the most out of your consultation, the most out of your haircuts, and just how to be navigate the salon world well was really fun and came out really easily. Imposter syndrome was also really kind of cathartic and fun to write about because it kind of reminded me of all the cool stuff that I've done. I'm so glad that you finished the audiobook, Daniel. I hope that you loved it. Yay. And also The Devil's Lettuce was really interesting to write about, getting to research a lot of the history around marijuana prohibition. That was really eye-opening. But I loved writing all of them. They were all so different, and I got to flex such different regions of my brain and talk to so many different people. And I also think that the book is a page turner. It's really easy to get through. I worked a lot on placement and flow of these stories for it to go by in a really engaging way. So I hope people love it.
What is your writing process like?
So it starts off with an outline where sometimes my writing is started from creative writing, and that's when I start to realize like, oh, I think I have a story to tell here. And that happened with both Over the Top and with Love That Story. Once I realize that there's something to write further there, I like to do an outline, because I find that if I don't do an outline, I start to write myself in circles. I start to say like the same thing over and over. And then I get frustrated. So an outline helps me kind of understand like what my objectives are and what I want to talk about. Then once I get my outline done, I go through and I start to get in. This is also true of Love That Story. Of Over the Top, I start to fill in the blanks. I start to connect point A to point B and figure out. Sometimes actually it's more like I know where I want to start and I know where I want to end, and I got to figure out what the flow is between. So for Love That Story, that was kind of a little bit more simple just because it was essays and I didn't have to think so much about how one goes into the other until I realized that I did, because I wanted to make sure that if I was talking about something in one chapter that built upon something like historically, that led into it in a smart way. So there's a little bit of flow and placement there, but not as much as like a full memoir.
We're like full on Carrie Bradshaw right now. Out of control. I love it. Okay, so let's take some questions from the audience. Let's see, where do we want to start? Let's see, Leslie writes, question, how did you keep going after going through sexual abuse? I'm struggling and I admire you and the strength you have.
Yeah, I think surviving sexual abuse is one of the hardest things that I've ever been through. And I think that the reason it's so hard to be a survivor of sexual abuse is because it robs you of your childhood. And you don't get to live a childhood the way that that so many other people do, especially when your world is painted in colors of sex when you're too young to understand what that means. And so I think that for me is why, as an adult, and such a huge part of my recovery is connecting to that inner child and doing things that bring me my childlike joy, which for me is gymnastics, it's figure skating, it's gardening right now, it's needle pointing right now, it's also doing hair, it's like literally drawing a bath and like doing a face mask. Like that's something that's always, Emily and I did that together when we were like 10. So I think anything that you used to love when you were a kid, if you can connect to that kid and make sure that inner child knows that you're safe and that you're here now and that you're going to protect that inner child and do things that bring you peace and joy, I think that helps to get through the immediate aftermath and a lot of that trauma. And then as you can get a little bit more time, it's a lot better.
Awesome. I have another question. Are there any stories that you wanted to include in the book but edited out? Can you tell us some?
Yes, I wrote one essay that was basically just like a journal of my experience of the 2020 election. And then it was like, I couldn't even stand editing it because I was like, Jesus, we just like lived through this. And I just don't, it just is so dark. So I still have it. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, that was one that I was just like, I'm draining this bath, you guys. It's like hotter than shit. I can't handle it. So yeah, that one was one that I was like, I think everyone's good on this right now.
Yeah. Which part of the book was the most difficult to write?
Probably Sorry, Karen. I think that it's really hard for white people to understand their complicity in white privilege and the history of white supremacy. And that was certainly uncomfortable for me to learn about. But that's a conversation that I've been learning about and having with myself for like 7 to 10 years. And so I think that for me, because of some of my life experiences, I was exposed to some of those ideas earlier, but I had that same knee-jerk reaction of like dismissal and denial and feeling really uncomfortable about it. And I've come a really long way on how I understand white privilege and the really awful scars that white supremacy and slavery and Jim Crow have left on the United States specifically. And so, and I think, and part of what makes that so hard is looking at your family's complicity in that.
Right.
And so that's another thing that I explore in that chapter is just this sense of duality, how multiple things can be true at the same time. You can love someone who also had racist beliefs, and you know, you can love someone who you vehemently disagree with. And I talk a lot about my relationship with my dad in that chapter, which has been really hard. And I'm so grateful that he was comfortable enough with himself and with our relationship for me to write about what's happened between us. But that chapter was really rough to write.
Yeah. It's intense to read. It's a good read though, because it forces reflection in a good way. Have you considered writing fiction for young LGBTQIA?
Yes.
Everybody wants positive stories.
I want to do fiction, and I have so many ideas, and that's definitely on my horizon.
Yeah. Let's see.
I also just want to say thank you all for just joining me on my gorgeous, like, Mariah Carey COVID virtual book tour. I'm so sorry that I couldn't be with you in LA in person. If you're just joining and you didn't buy a ticket to what this in-person event was supposed to be, because if you were in person, again, you're already getting your copy. But if you weren't at the in-person event or didn't buy a ticket to that event, you can still get a signed copy by clicking this gorgeous little green button below our videos. Okay, good, there you are. And so, yeah, you can click that, grab your signed copy. I signed tons of copies. And thank you so much for coming on tonight. I'm so appreciative of your time, and I love everyone so much. Does anyone have any questions, or are we good?
I think
I feel like we're good. I feel like I'm also scaring people because I'm sweating, but it's not because I have a fever. It's because this bathtub water is like so fucking hot, you guys.
I've been sitting in the bathtub for like 45 minutes now.
I've been in the bathtub for like 30 minutes. I'm literally so ready to get out of here. It seemed like a really good idea at the beginning, but now I'm just like really hot.
Yeah, this was a mistake. We're backtracking now.
Thanks for having me on. Order Love That Story. And you know what also too? Could you just share it? Like the parts that are speaking to you, share it on your Instagram, share it on your TikTok. Tag me. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see the parts that are speaking to you. Yeah, and that would just mean so much to me. And thank you for supporting me in my work.
Guys, thank you so much for joining us today, everyone in the audience.
And this is bathtub water, not sweat. Don't worry, everyone. Everything's fine.
And thank you to Jonathan and Emily. Jonathan, especially, such a trooper. COVID, it's you're on the East Coast, so it's 10 p.m. there. We really appreciate you doing this for all of your fans.
I wish I could have seen you in real life. Take a gorgeous bath.
As Jonathan said, if you haven't already received the book included with your ticket, click that green button and you can get a copy that has a signed book plate from our store. We're also supporting local bookstore, independent bookstore.
Yes.
Woo! All right. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah.
Bye.